There are secrets a man carries that change the weight of his bones. I'm 55 years old now, and I've carried mine for 23 years. Every morning when I wake up in this cabin, surrounded by white pine and the sound of wind through the branches, I remember the winter when everything I thought I knew about this world cracked open like lake ice in spring. I'm telling this now because the silence has become heavier than the truth, and because I'm not sure how much time I have left to tell it. My name is John Mercer, and I watched a Wendigo transform in front of me. Then it said terrible things. Things I can never unhear. Before that winter, my life was simple in the way that isolation makes simple. I'd been living alone in northern Minnesota for 7 years, working as a logger until an accident with a falling branch shattered my left knee. The settlement money was enough to buy this 140 acres of forest land, build a small cabin, and live quietly. I was 42 years old and tired of people. Tired of their noise, their complications, their endless need for things that didn't matter. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town of Birchwood, population 312, life moved to a different rhythm. The rhythm of seasons, of weather, of survival. The cabin was one room with a loft, built from timber I'd cut myself. Wood stove in the corner, narrow bed against the north wall, a table where I ate and read by kerosene lamp. No electricity, no phone, no television. Just the forest and me. I hunted deer and rabbit, trapped beaver and muskrat for their pelts, grew vegetables in the short summer, and spent the long winters reading worn paperbacks I'd trade for supplies in town twice a year. It was a good life. A quiet life. The kind of life where a man could think, could process all the noise he'd left behind. The Ojibwe man at the trading post in Birchwood, whose name was Thomas Littlewolf, had warned me about my land when I first bought it. He was in his 70s then, with hands like weathered leather and eyes that seemed to look through things rather than at them. He told me the forest I'd chosen had a reputation among his people. Said there were stories about that stretch of woods going back centuries. Stories about hunger that walked on 2 legs. Stories about transformation and terrible wisdom. I'd smiled politely and thanked him for the warning. I didn't believe in stories. I believed in what I could see, touch, measure. I believed in the solid reality of wood and stone, in the predictable patterns of animal behavior, in the logic of seasons. The supernatural was for people who needed explanations for things they didn't understand. I understood the forest. I'd spent my entire adult life in woods like these. That first winter after the encounter happened was 2002. November came early that year, bringing snow before Halloween and temperatures that dropped to 15 below zero by Thanksgiving. I remember the exact date everything changed. December 9th. A Monday. The sky had been white-gray for 3 days straight, the kind of sky that makes you forget the sun exists. I was splitting wood behind the cabin, my breath coming out in clouds so thick I could barely see the axe blade. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the crack of branches under snow weight, not the call of ravens or the distant howl of wolves. This was different. A low, resonant vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It made my chest vibrate, made my teeth ache. The sound of something large moving through the forest, but wrong somehow. The rhythm was off. Too many legs or not enough. I couldn't tell. I stopped mid-swing, axe frozen above my head, and listened. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. The birds went silent. Even the wind stopped. In the terrible quiet that followed, I heard it again. Closer this time. And with it came a smell. Rot and copper and something else. Something that reminded me of winter storms and old bones and hunger. Every instinct I had screamed at me to go inside, bar the door, load my rifle. But I couldn't move. I stood there in the snow, axe raised like a pathetic weapon, and watched the tree line 50 yards from my cabin. The shadows there seemed darker than they should be, deeper, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then I saw it step into the clearing. Nothing in my 42 years had prepared me for what emerged from those trees. I'd seen bears, mountain lions, wolves. I'd seen a moose charge through thick brush like it was tall grass. I'd seen nature in all its violent, beautiful power. But this was different. This was wrong in a way that made my brain stumble trying to process what my eyes were showing me. It was tall. 8 feet at least, maybe 9. Impossibly thin, like something that had been starved for years, with skin the color of old snow and ash stretched tight over bones that jutted at sharp angles. The limbs were too long, the joints bent in ways that shouldn't be possible. But it walked upright. That was the worst part. It walked like a man, but the gait was all wrong. Stilted, jerking, as if it was remembering how to move rather than knowing. The head was the hardest to look at. Elongated, almost skull-like, with deep-set eyes that reflected the weak winter light like an animal's. Antlers grew from the crown, not like a deer's but twisted, broken, asymmetrical. Some points were sharp, others blunted, as if they'd been worn down by rubbing against trees or stone. The mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that were neither animal nor human but something caught between. I should have run. Every fiber of my being knew I should run. But my legs wouldn't obey. I just stood there, axe still raised, watching this impossible thing watch me. We stayed like that for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. The longest 30 seconds of my life. Then it moved. Not toward me but sideways, circling. Testing. The way a predator circles prey. I forced myself to lower the axe slowly, to not make any sudden movements. My mouth was so dry I couldn't swallow. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. And then it spoke. Not in words exactly, but in that same resonant vocalization I'd heard before. Only now I was close enough to realize it wasn't just sound. It was communication. Intention. The vibration of it went through my chest into my bones and somehow I understood. Not the literal meaning but the feeling behind it. Curiosity. Hunger. Warning. I found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I don't want any trouble. The creature's head tilted. The movement was so sudden, so bird-like that I flinched. It took a step closer. Then another. I could smell it now. That combination of decay and winter and something acrid that made my eyes water. The snow crunched under its feet, each step deliberate, controlled. It was testing my reaction, I realized. Seeing if I would run, if I would fight, if I would freeze. I did the only thing I could think of. I stood my ground. Kept eye contact. Showed no fear, even though fear was the only thing in my body at that moment. My grandfather, who'd been a trapper in Canada, had taught me that about predators. Never run. Never show weakness. Stand tall and make yourself a difficult target. The creature stopped 10 feet away. Close enough that I could see the individual ribs beneath its skin, the way its breath came out in ragged clouds, the intelligence in those deep-set eyes. And that's when I saw it. The humanity. Buried deep, almost invisible, but there. Something in the way it held itself, in the angle of its shoulders, in the sadness that seemed to radiate from it like heat from a dying fire. This thing had been a person once. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. Somehow, impossibly, this creature had been human. The thought made my stomach turn, made the world tilt sideways. Because if this thing had been human, that meant transformation was possible. That meant the boundary between man and monster was thinner than I'd ever imagined. We stood there in the snow as the light began to fail, this creature and me, connected by some understanding I didn't have words for. And then, without warning, it turned and walked back into the forest. The shadows swallowed it whole, and the world returned to normal. The birds started calling again. The wind picked up. The temperature felt warmer somehow, even though nothing had changed. I stood there until my legs started shaking so badly I had to sit down in the snow. I sat there until full dark, trying to convince myself I'd hallucinated. Hypothermia maybe, or carbon monoxide from a faulty stove. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. And I knew it would come back. For 3 days, I didn't leave the cabin except to get firewood from the pile by the door. I kept my rifle loaded and within reach at all times. Slept in 2-hour shifts, jerking awake at every sound. The forest felt different now. Watching. Waiting. Every shadow held potential threat. Every unusual sound made my pulse spike. On the fourth day, I forced myself to think rationally. I had two choices: pack up, abandon the cabin, go back to civilization and spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd lost my mind, or stay, accept what I'd seen, and figure out how to live with it. The first option felt like cowardice. The second felt like suicide. But I'd never been a coward. I started researching. I had maybe 20 books in the cabin, none of them about mythology or folklore. But I remembered Thomas Littlewolf's warning, and I remembered the word Wendigo from stories I'd heard growing up. Algonquian legend. A spirit of winter and hunger that possessed people, transformed them into monsters. The details were vague in my memory, distorted by time and disbelief. The next time I made the trip to Birchwood in mid-January, I went straight to the trading post. Thomas was there, sorting through a shipment of canned goods. When he looked up and saw my face, something changed in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. I nodded. Couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud yet. He set down the can he was holding and gestured for me to follow him to the back room. It was cluttered with supplies, old traps, equipment waiting for repair. He cleared a space on a wooden crate and we both sat down. "Tell me," he said simply. So I did. I told him everything. The encounter, the transformation I'd witnessed, the terrible understanding that had passed between us. I expected him to think I was crazy, or to dismiss it as an animal I'd misidentified. Instead, he just listened, his weathered face grave. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What you saw was real. My grandfather saw one in 1947. My great-uncle claimed he spoke with one in the 30s. It's rare, but it happens. The Wendigo isn't just a story we tell to scare children. It's a warning about what happens when hunger consumes everything else. When a person gives up their humanity for survival." "But how?" I asked. "How is it possible?" He shook his head. "Some questions don't have answers you'd understand. The old ones, my ancestors, they knew this land had rules different from what white men believe. Transformation is possible when you cross certain boundaries. When you eat what shouldn't be eaten. When you become so consumed by need that nothing else remains." I felt sick. Cannibalism. Sometimes. Or sometimes just the spiritual equivalent. Consuming others to fill an emptiness that can never be filled. The Wendigo is always hungry, John. That's the curse. No matter how much it eats, it's never satisfied. Never whole. We talked for another hour. He told me stories his grandfather had told him. Stories about people who'd disappeared into the woods and come back changed. People who'd survived impossible winters alone and returned with something broken inside them. People who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. When I left the trading post that day, I had more questions than answers. But I also had something else. Validation. I wasn't crazy. What I'd seen was real, and it was part of this land's hidden history. A history most people chose to ignore or forget. The creature returned 2 weeks later. I was outside, checking my trapline, when I felt that familiar shift in the air. The silence, the cold, the sense of being watched. I turned slowly, and there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with those impossible eyes. This time, I didn't freeze. I stood still, but I wasn't paralyzed by fear. I was ready. As ready as anyone could be. "I know what you are," I said, my voice carrying across the snow. "I know you were human once." The creature's head tilted. That same bird-like movement. And then it did something I'll never forget. It nodded. A slow, deliberate acknowledgement. The gesture was so human, so familiar, that it broke something in my chest. This thing understood me. It comprehended language, gesture, meaning. Whatever transformation had happened to it, some part of its humanity remained. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Maybe loneliness, maybe curiosity, maybe just the simple human need to connect with another consciousness. But I said, "Are you hungry?" Another nod. I went into the cabin and came back out with the haunch of a deer I'd shot 3 days before. It was frozen solid, maybe 20 pounds of meat. I set it on a stump halfway between us and stepped back. The creature watched me for a moment, then moved forward with that strange, stilted gait. It took the meat and retreated to the tree line. What happened next changed everything. It began to transform. The transformation wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. I watched, rooted to the spot, as the creature's body seemed to fold in on itself. The limbs shortened, the spine curved, the antlers receded into the skull with sounds like breaking branches. The skin rippled and shifted, and beneath it I could see the bones moving, reshaping, finding new configurations. The whole process took maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. The sounds alone were enough to make me nauseous. Wet cracks, grinding pops, the whisper of shifting flesh. When it was done, a man crouched there in the snow. Naked, emaciated, shaking with cold or pain or both. He looked to be in his 60s, with long gray hair matted with ice and eyes that held decades of suffering. He clutched the frozen meat to his chest like a child clutching a toy. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough and used, like gravel in a barrel. "Thank you." I stood there speechless. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that I was witnessing something that violated every law of nature I understood. But the evidence was right in front of me. The creature was gone. The man was real. How long? I finally managed to ask. He looked up at me with those haunted eyes. Since 1967. 35 years. My legs went weak. "What happened to you?" He was shaking so badly now that his teeth chattered when he spoke. "I got lost. Winter storm in northern Ontario. 3 others with me. We ran out of food. They died. I survived. But survival came with a price." He clutched the meat tighter. "I crossed a line I can't uncross." I went inside and brought out blankets, clothes that would be too big on his frame but better than nothing. He wrapped himself up and devoured the frozen venison right there in the snow, tearing at it with teeth that still looked too sharp, too predatory. When he was done, he looked more human. Fuller somehow, though the meat couldn't possibly have made that much difference so quickly. "What's your name?" I asked. "Robert. Robert Mitchum. I had a wife once. 3 children. They're all gone now. Probably think I'm dead. Maybe I am." We talked until dark. He told me his story in fragments, broken pieces that didn't always fit together coherently. The hunting trip that went wrong. The storm that lasted 5 days. The slow starvation. The moment when the youngest member of their group, a boy of 19, died in his sleep. The terrible decision Robert had made in the darkness of that tent, with hunger clawing at his insides and death breathing down his neck. "I thought I'd die afterward," he said quietly. "Thought God would strike me down for what I'd done. Instead, I changed. Slowly at first, then faster. By the time I made it back to civilization, I wasn't human anymore. Not fully. I ran. Came south. Found these woods. Been here ever since. Can you control it?" I asked. "The transformation." He shook his head. "Not really. When I'm fed, when I have meat, I can hold human form for a while. Hours, sometimes days. But the hunger always comes back. And when it does, I change. The Wendigo form is stronger, faster, doesn't feel the cold. It's better suited for hunting. For survival. But it's also a curse. Because no matter how much I eat in that form, I'm never satisfied. Never full. The hunger just grows. I should have been afraid. Should have sent him away, barred my door, loaded my rifle. But instead I felt something else. Pity. And maybe recognition. Because wasn't I out here trying to escape something too? Wasn't I hiding from a world I couldn't fit into anymore? We were both creatures of isolation, both trying to survive in our own ways. "You can stay," I said. The words came out before I'd really thought them through. "For tonight, at least. It's too cold." Robert looked at me with such profound gratitude that I had to look away. "You shouldn't trust me," he said. "The hunger doesn't care about kindness. When it comes, I won't be able to control what happens." I'll take my chances. That night, I gave him my bed and slept on the floor by the stove with my rifle across my lap. He didn't transform. In the morning, he was still human, still wrapped in my blankets, looking less like a monster and more like a broken old man who'd survived something that should have killed him. That was the beginning of our strange coexistence. Robert would visit every few weeks, sometimes in human form, sometimes as the Wendigo. I'd leave meat for him, we'd talk, and he'd disappear back into the forest. He told me things during those visits. Terrible things about what he'd seen and done over the past 3 decades. About the people who'd gone missing in these woods and what had really happened to them. About the nature of hunger and how it could consume a soul as surely as it consumed flesh. And slowly, over months and then years, I began to understand what Thomas Littlewolf had tried to warn me about. These woods held secrets that most people would never know. And now I was part of those secrets. A keeper of knowledge that shouldn't exist. The first year was the hardest. Learning to live with the knowledge that the monster from legend was real, that it had a name and a history and something resembling a conscience. Robert became a fixture in my life, a presence I both welcomed and feared. He'd show up every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes human, sometimes in his Wendigo form. I learned to read the signs of his coming. The unnatural silence, the drop in temperature, the way the animals would flee the area hours before he arrived. When he was human, we'd sit by my wood stove and talk for hours. He told me about his life before. His wife, Marie, who'd loved gardening and baking pies. His 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, who'd be in their 40s now if they were still alive. His job as an electrician in a small town outside Thunder Bay. The ordinary details of an ordinary life that had been shattered by one terrible winter and one impossible decision. Do you ever regret it? I asked him one night. We were both drinking coffee laced with whiskey, watching the fire burn low. The choice you made. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, every single day. But regret doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring back the boy I ate. Doesn't give me back the life I lost. Doesn't make me human again. All regret does is remind me that I used to be capable of feeling guilty. You still feel guilty, I pointed out. I can hear it in your voice. Maybe. Or maybe that's just muscle memory. The ghost of who I was. He stared into his coffee cup. You know what the worst part is, John? It's not the hunger. It's not the transformation. It's the forgetting. Every year, I remember a little less about what it felt like to be human. Marie's face is getting blurry. My children's voices are fading. Soon, there won't be anything left of Robert Mitchum except the hunger and the monster. I didn't know what to say to that. What comfort could I offer to a man who'd lost everything, including himself? When he was in Wendigo form, the dynamic was different. He couldn't speak then, not with words, but we communicated in other ways. Gestures, body language, those low vocalizations that somehow conveyed meaning. He'd help me with tasks sometimes. Once, he dragged a massive fallen tree to my cabin that I'd been trying to move for weeks. Another time, he stood guard while I repaired my roof, watching the forest for threats. In his Wendigo form, he was protective of me. As if having one person who knew his secret, who treated him with kindness, was enough to earn some kind of loyalty. But there were dangerous moments too. Times when the hunger overtook him and I'd see something feral flash in those eyes. Times when I'd wake in the middle of the night to find him standing outside my cabin, pressed against the window, watching me sleep. Those were the times I'd grip my rifle and remind myself that no matter how much we talked, no matter how much humanity remained in him, he was still a predator. Still driven by needs I couldn't understand. The years passed. 2003, 2004, 2005. The world beyond my forest moved on without me. 9/11 happened, and I only heard about it 6 months later from Thomas Littlewolf. A whole war started and ended while I chopped wood and set trap lines and kept a monster secret. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made the right choice, staying out here, becoming complicit in what Robert was. But I couldn't imagine going back now. This was my life. This isolation, this strange friendship, this daily dance with something that shouldn't exist. Thomas Littlewolf died in 2006. Heart attack while stocking shelves in the trading post. His grandson took over the business, a young man named David who looked at me with suspicion when I came to town. He'd heard stories about me I could tell. The hermit who lived too deep in the woods. The strange white man who'd been out there too long, probably gone crazy from the isolation. Let him think what he wanted. I knew the truth, and the truth was stranger than any story he could imagine. It was in 2008 when things started to change. Robert began coming less frequently. When he did show up, he was more agitated, more difficult to communicate with even in human form. The transformations were taking longer, as if his body was fighting the process. And the things he said during those visits became darker, more disturbing. There are others, he told me one freezing February night. Others like me. I can feel them. Smell them. The forest is crowded with hunger. I felt ice settle in my stomach. How many? I don't know. 3, maybe 4. They are drawn here. Something about this land makes the transformation easier. Stronger. The old boundaries are thin here. The places where human and other can blur. Are they like you? I asked. Do they have any humanity left? Robert's laugh was bitter and hollow. No, most don't. Most are just hunger wearing human skin. They've been transformed longer, or they crossed darker lines. They don't remember being human. Don't want to. That was when I realized the danger I'd put myself in. Not just from Robert but from whatever else was out there in those woods. I'd been so focused on my one Wendigo, my one monster with a man's memories and a man's guilt, that I'd forgotten there could be others. Others without Robert's restraint. Others who'd see me as nothing more than meat. The summer of 2009 brought the first real confrontation. I was checking my trapline in early August, the heat oppressive even under the forest canopy, when I felt it. That familiar shift in the air, but wrong somehow. Colder than it should be, sharper. The birds went silent, but there was no drop in temperature this time. Instead, the air felt charged, electric, like the moments before a lightning strike. I turned slowly and saw it. Another Wendigo, but different from Robert. This one was larger, more grotesque, with antlers that spread like dead tree branches and skin so pale it was almost translucent. Its eyes were completely black, void-like, holding no trace of human consciousness. Just hunger and hate and ancient, terrible need. It moved faster than Robert ever had. One moment it was 30 yards away, the next it was on me. I didn't have time to reach for my rifle. I barely had time to throw up my arms before it crashed into me, sending us both tumbling into the underbrush. The smell was overwhelming, rot and bile and something that made my eyes water. Its breath on my face was like winter wind, cold enough to burn. I was going to die. I knew it with absolute certainty. This thing was going to tear me apart and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Its jaws opened, teeth like broken glass, and I closed my eyes because I didn't want to see what came next. Then I heard it. A roar that shook the trees, that made the earth tremble. The weight lifted off me suddenly, and I opened my eyes to see Robert's Wendigo form locked in combat with the other creature. They were a blur of limbs and teeth and violence, moving with impossible speed through the forest. Trees cracked, branches splintered, the ground tore up under their feet. I scrambled backward, finding my rifle, but I couldn't get a clear shot. They moved too fast, too close together. All I could do was watch as Robert fought to defend me against something that wanted nothing more than to feed. The battle lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt eternal. Finally, Robert got his teeth into the other Wendigo's throat and held on until the thing stopped moving. When it was over, Robert stood there in the carnage, covered in blood that steamed in the summer heat. The other Wendigo's body began to dissolve, melting into the forest floor like snow in spring. Within minutes, there was nothing left but churned earth and the smell of copper. Robert transformed back slowly, painfully. When he was human again, he collapsed. I ran to him, helped him sit up against a tree. He was breathing hard, shaking, his skin gray with exhaustion. "Thank you," I said. Inadequate words for someone who'd just saved my life. He shook his head. Don't thank me. That thing would have found you eventually. They can smell humans, especially humans who know about them. You're marked now, John. By being my friend, you've made yourself a target. My blood ran cold. What do I do? Nothing you can do. Just be careful. Stay armed. Don't go deep into the forest alone. He coughed and blood flecked his lips. And understand that I won't always be there to protect you. The others are getting bolder. They're coming out of the deep woods, moving closer to human settlements. Something's changing. Over the next few years, I learned what he meant. There were more sightings, more disappearances. Hikers who never came back from their trails. Hunters who vanished without a trace. The authorities blamed bears or accidents or people simply getting lost. But I knew better. The Wendigos were multiplying, or gathering, or something. The balance Robert had talked about was shifting. My cabin became more fortress than home. I reinforced the walls, installed heavy shutters, kept multiple rifles loaded and accessible. Sleep became impossible without jerking awake at every sound. The isolation I'd once craved now felt like a death sentence. But I couldn't leave. Not just because I'd invested too much of my life here, but because I couldn't abandon Robert. He was the only thing standing between these creatures and the people in Birchwood. He was the guardian they didn't know they had. In 2012, Robert told me something that changed everything. We were sitting by the fire in November, the first real snow of the season falling outside. He'd been quiet all evening, staring into the flames with an expression I'd never seen before. Resignation, maybe. Or acceptance. I'm getting weaker, he said finally. The transformations are getting harder. Takes more energy each time. My body is wearing out. How long? I asked, though I didn't want to hear the answer. A year. Maybe 2. The curse can only sustain a body for so long before it burns out. I've lasted longer than most because I fight it, because I try to hold onto my humanity. But that fight takes a toll. He turned to look at me and his eyes were wet. When I go, John, when I finally die, you need to leave this place. The others will sense it. They'll know there's no one protecting this territory anymore. They'll come for you and for everyone in Birchwood. I can't just abandon you, I said. You can and you will. Because the alternative is dying for a secret that shouldn't exist. You've already given me more than I deserved. More than I had any right to ask for. You gave me back a piece of my humanity when I thought it was all gone. That's enough. That's more than enough. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat in the silence. 2 men who'd found an impossible friendship in an impossible situation, knowing that time was running out. The winter of 2014 was the hardest winter in 50 years. The temperatures dropped to 30 below zero and stayed there for weeks. Snow piled up in drifts taller than my cabin. The world became nothing but white and silence and cold so intense it felt like knives against exposed skin. I had to dig my way out just to reach the wood pile every morning. Game was scarce, and checking trap lines became nearly impossible. Robert came less and less. When he did show up, he was barely able to maintain human form for more than an hour before the transformation overtook him again. The curse was winning, burning through what little remained of his humanity. He'd lost so much weight that his human form was skeletal, all sharp angles and hollow spaces. His eyes had sunken deep into his skull, and his hair had gone completely white. I'm scared, he told me in late January. We were huddled by the stove, both wrapped in blankets, while the wind screamed outside like something alive and furious. I've faced death before, welcomed it even. But this is different. I don't know what happens when a Wendigo dies. Do I just cease to exist? Does some part of me continue? Is there any chance of redemption, or am I damned for what I did all those years ago? I didn't have answers for him. I'd never been particularly religious, and the events of the past 12 years had only made the question of God more complicated. If there was a divine plan, I couldn't see how Robert's suffering fit into it. He'd made one terrible choice in an impossible situation, and he'd paid for it with decades of isolation and pain. Wasn't that punishment enough? I think, I said slowly, that if there's any justice in the universe, it takes into account what you've done since. The people you've protected. The monster you could have become but didn't. That has to count for something. He smiled sadly. You're a good friend, John. Better than I deserve. That was the last real conversation we had. 2 days later, in the middle of a blizzard, I heard the sound outside. Not the usual warning signs, but something else. A howl that spoke of pain and loss and finality. I grabbed my rifle and went to the door, even though opening it meant letting in a blast of cold that threatened to steal the breath from my lungs. Robert was there, in Wendigo form, collapsed in the snow. He was smaller than I'd ever seen him, as if he was folding in on himself. The antlers were broken, hanging at odd angles. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhalation forming clouds of steam that dissipated instantly in the frigid air. I did something incredibly foolish. I went out there in nothing but my coat and boots, and I knelt beside him. The cold bit into my bones immediately, but I didn't care. I put my hand on what passed for his shoulder, feeling the fevered heat of his skin even through the fur and bone. It's okay, I said, not sure if he could understand me in this form. You don't have to fight anymore. He turned his massive head to look at me, and in those eyes I saw Robert Mitchum. Not the monster, not the curse, but the man. The electrician from Thunder Bay who'd loved his wife and children. Who'd made one terrible choice and paid for it with everything he had. The eyes held recognition, gratitude, and something that looked like peace. Then he spoke. Not in that resonant vocalization I'd heard before, but in actual words. Broken, distorted by the shape of his mouth, but words nonetheless. The terrible things he'd been holding back for 12 years. I remember their names, he said. All of them. Every person I killed to survive. Every life I took. 19 souls over 35 years. I remember their faces. Their last words. The taste of their fear. His voice cracked. And I remember the boy in that tent. Kevin Morrison. 19 years old. His mother's name was Susan. He had a girlfriend waiting for him back home. Her name was Beth. He showed me pictures of her the day before he died. He was going to propose that spring. I felt tears freeze on my face. Robert. I need to say it. Need someone to know. To remember. So they're not just forgotten. So what happened to them matters. Kevin Morrison. Susan's boy. Beth's love. I ate him to survive, and I've carried his life with me every day since. The words came faster now, desperate. Margaret Chen, 1974. A biologist studying wolves. James Parker, 1981. A surveyor. Angela Whitehorse, 1989. A ranger. I remember them all. Their hopes, their families, their last moments. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. He was crying now if Wendigos could cry. The sound was heartbreaking, inhuman, and human at the same time. All the guilt and pain and regret of 3 decades pouring out in those final moments. I held him while he confessed, while he spoke the names of his victims into the howling wind, while he purged his soul of secrets that had poisoned him from the inside out. When he finally fell silent, the transformation began one last time. But this wasn't like before. His body didn't shift to human form. Instead, it simply began to dissolve, the same way the other Wendigos had. Flesh turning to ash, bones crumbling to dust, until there was nothing left but gray particles that the wind scattered across the snow. Robert Mitchum was gone. The monster was gone. All that remained was the memory of a man who'd fought his curse for 35 years and finally found release. I knelt in the snow for a long time after, not caring about the cold, not caring about anything except the weight of what I'd witnessed. When I finally stood and went back inside, my clothes were frozen stiff and I couldn't feel my feet. But I was alive. And I had a responsibility now. Robert had entrusted me with his confession, with the names and memories of people who deserved to be remembered as more than just statistics of disappearance. I spent the next week writing everything down, every name he'd told me, every detail I could remember. It felt like the least I could do. A memorial to both the victims and the monster who'd regretted every single one. It's been 11 years since Robert died. I'm 55 now, still living in the same cabin, still keeping the same secrets. I should have left like he told me to. Should have packed up and moved to civilization where the only monsters are human and comprehensible. But I didn't. I stayed because someone needed to. Someone needed to watch these woods and remember what happened here. The other Wendigos have become more active since Robert's death, just like he predicted. There have been more disappearances, more unexplained deaths. The authorities are starting to pay attention, talking about sending in teams to investigate. I've done what I can to discourage them, spread rumors about dangerous terrain and bad luck, anything to keep them away. Because if they come in force, if they start poking around seriously, they'll either become victims or they'll discover something that should remain hidden. Thomas Littlewolf's grandson David and I have formed an uneasy alliance. He knows some of what I know, enough to understand that the old stories his grandfather told weren't just stories. We work together to protect Birchwood as best we can, spreading warnings disguised as common sense, keeping track of the missing, making sure no one goes into the deep woods alone. I'm not the man I was when I first moved out here. The years have changed me, the isolation has worn grooves in my soul, and the things I've seen have given me nightmares that never quite go away. But I've also gained something. Purpose, maybe. Or just the grim satisfaction of knowing that what I do matters, even if no one will ever know I'm doing it. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I hear them out there. The Wendigos, calling to each other across the frozen darkness. The sound is lonely and terrible and beautiful all at once. It reminds me that there are things in this world that defy understanding, that exist in the spaces between what we think we know and what we can prove. Robert told me terrible things that night he died. Not just the names of his victims, but truths about hunger and transformation and what it means to be human. He told me that the line between man and monster isn't as clear as we'd like to believe. That given the right circumstances, anyone could cross it. That survival comes with costs we can't always anticipate and can never fully repay. But he also showed me something else. That even in the darkest transformation, even when cursed and corrupted and reduced to nothing but need, some spark of humanity can remain. That remorse is real, that guilt matters, that the act of remembering victims and speaking their names has power. Robert Mitchum was a monster, yes. But he was also a man who fought his curse for 35 years, who protected the innocent when he could, who died trying to atone for sins that could never be fully atoned for. I don't know how much longer I'll stay here. My knee aches worse every winter, and the isolation gets heavier with each passing year. Eventually, age or the cold or the forest will claim me, same as they claim everyone who stays too long in places like this. But until then, I'll keep watch. I'll remember the names Robert told me. I'll do what I can to keep the Wendigos away from the innocent. And on quiet nights when the snow falls soft and thick and the world seems impossibly peaceful, I'll think about my friend, the electrician from Thunder Bay who made one terrible choice and spent the rest of his life paying for it, who taught me that monsters aren't always what they seem, and that humanity isn't always found where you expect it. There are secrets a man carries that change the weight of his bones. I've carried mine for 23 years now, and I'll carry them until I can't anymore. This is my burden, my purpose, my strange life in these strange woods, where the boundary between legend and reality, between man and monster, is thinner than most people will ever know. The Wendigo transformed in front of me. Then it said terrible things. And in those terrible things, I found a kind of truth that can't be spoken in daylight, only whispered in darkness to people willing to hear. That's what I offer you now. Not comfort, not explanations, but the simple acknowledgement that there are forces in this world we don't control and can't fully understand. And sometimes the most monstrous things can teach us the most profound lessons about what it means to be human. I'll stay here in these woods until I can't anymore. And when my time comes, maybe someone else will take up the watch. Maybe the secret will pass to another keeper, another witness. Or maybe it'll die with me, returning to legend where perhaps it belongs. But Robert Mitchum was real. The people he killed were real. Their names deserve to be remembered. Kevin Morrison, Margaret Chen, James Parker, Angela Whitehorse, and all the others he confessed in those final moments. They were real people with real lives, and they're gone because a man crossed a line that shouldn't exist but does. That's the terrible thing the Wendigo told me. That we're all capable of becoming monsters. That the hunger exists in all of us, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. And that the only thing standing between civilization and chaos is the choice to remain human, even when remaining human is the hardest thing we'll ever do. I made my choice. I stayed human, stayed kind, stayed compassionate even when confronted with something that should have destroyed my capacity for compassion. And I'll keep making that choice, day after day, until the forest takes me or until I finally find the courage to leave. This is my confession, my witness, my truth. Take it for what it's worth. Believe it or don't. But know that somewhere in the forests of northern Minnesota, an old man keeps watch over secrets that shouldn't exist, protecting people who'll never know he exists. And that's enough. It has to be enough. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Keep watch. Remember. Choose humanity. And hope that when our time comes, we've done enough to earn whatever peace awaits us on the other side.